Imagine how the inmates feel when they come to the acceptance that they will be executed. Free citizens once just like you are on death row to be executed. Thus, to be legally killed on this channel, we bring to you daily information on these inmates in the United States of America who lose their freedom. To be updated, kindly subscribe now to our channel and turn on the notification bell now. In this video, we bring to you the information on oldest inmates executed in Alabama State in the United States. First on the list is James Barney Hubbard. On August 5th, 2004, James Barney Hubbard was executed by lethal injection at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, bringing to an end one of the most drawn-out death penalty cases in the state's history. At the age of 74, Hubbard became the oldest person executed in Alabama since the reinstatement of the death penalty in the 1970s. But his story stretches back much further. Through decades of violence, parole failures, and courtroom battles that tested the patience of victims' families and the limits of the American criminal justice system. Born March 15, 1930, in Tuscaloosa County, James Barney Hubbard grew up during the Great Depression in a poor, rural Alabama family. His early life was marred by instability and petty crime. By his teenage years, he had developed a reputation for aggression, substance abuse, and brushes with the law. His criminal behavior escalated quickly. In 1957, at the age of 27, Hubbard was convicted of the murder of 72-year-old Rosa Tatum, his landlord. He had reportedly argued with Tatum over rent and money. In a rage, he beat her to death in her home, a crime that shocked the local community. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder and sent to Draper Correctional Center. While behind bars, Hubbard was not known for rehabilitation. Though he occasionally held prison jobs and participated in Bible studies, prison records described him as manipulative, uncooperative, and quick-tempered. Nevertheless, in 1976, after serving just 19 years of a life sentence, Hubbard was granted parole by the Alabama Board of Pardons and Paroles. This decision would later haunt the state. Just 1 year after his release, Hubbard committed another brutal murder, one that would ultimately seal his fate. On November 3, 1977, Hubbard visited the home of 62-year-old Lillian Montgomery, an elderly widow who had befriended him following his release. Lillian was a generous and compassionate woman who believed in second chances. She had offered Hubbard assistance after his release, helping him secure meals and a place to stay temporarily. The two were not romantically involved, but Lillian had trusted him. On that November morning, Hubbard went to Lillian's home in Tuscaloosa, likely under the pretense of needing help. At some point during the visit, something shifted. Prosecutors later argued that Hubbard intended to rob her and that when she refused to give him money, he became enraged. What followed was a gruesome and senseless killing. Lillian was beaten, strangled, and stabbed multiple times, including a fatal slashing of her throat. The crime scene was described by investigators as horrifying, with signs of prolonged struggle. Hubbard stole approximately $150 from the house before fleeing. The attack was not impulsive. It was methodical and vicious. Lillian's body was discovered later that day by a neighbor who had come to check on her. News of the murder spread quickly through Tuscaloosa, and the community was both devastated and furious, especially when it was revealed that Hubbard had been paroled for a previous murder. Hubbard was arrested within 48 hours. He was found at a nearby boarding house, drinking and attempting to sell some of the items he had taken from Lillian's home. Under interrogation, he confessed to the crime but later recanted, claiming he'd been drunk and didn't recall what had happened. Still, the evidence was damning. Blood-stained clothing, stolen property, and his own detailed admission. He was charged with capital murder under Alabama's law due to the combination of robbery and homicide. Hubbard went to trial in 1978 in Tuscaloosa County Circuit Court. The prosecution's case was straightforward and devastating. They showed that Hubbard had a violent history, was on parole for murder, and had targeted a woman who had shown him nothing but kindness. The autopsy revealed that Lillian had defensive wounds, indicating she fought for her life. Hubbard's defense team offered little in the way of rebuttal, leaning heavily on his intoxication at the time of the murder and his troubled background. They argued that the killing lacked the premeditation necessary for a capital conviction. However, the jury was unconvinced. Within a matter of hours, James Barney Hubbard was found guilty and sentenced to death. Although the verdict was swift, the path to Hubbard's execution would be anything but. Over the next 26 years, Hubbard's attorneys filed a seemingly endless series of appeals, motions, and petitions. These spanned state and federal courts, citing grounds ranging from ineffective assistance of counsel to claims of age-based discrimination and cruel and unusual punishment. One of the central arguments was Hubbard's age and deteriorating physical condition. By the 2000s, Hubbard suffered from heart disease, arthritis, and failing eyesight. He used a wheelchair and was often described as frail. His attorneys contended that executing a man in such poor health violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. They also argued that the decades-long delay itself constituted psychological torture. The state disagreed. Prosecutors maintained that Hubbard's physical condition was irrelevant, and that his age was a result of his own prolonged appeals. They stressed that the heinousness of his crime, committed just a year after being paroled for a previous murder, demanded justice, no matter how much time had passed. In July 2004, the U.S. Supreme Court declined to intervene, removing the final legal barrier. Alabama Governor Bob Riley signed the death warrant, and an execution date was set for August 5th. In the final week of his life, Hubbard received a handful of visitors, including his attorney, a prison chaplain, and a local pastor. He reportedly spent much of his time reading religious texts and reflecting on his crimes. In interviews, he expressed remorse for the murder of Lillian Montgomery and acknowledged that he had wasted the second chance he'd been given. On the evening of August 5th, 2004, Hubbard was wheeled into the execution chamber at Holman Prison, located in Atmore, Alabama. At 6:36 p.m., the lethal injection process began. Witnesses said Hubbard looked calm, even resigned. His final words were, "I regret I done the crime, and I'm sorry for the victim's family." He was pronounced dead at 6:45 p.m. Hubbard's execution drew national attention, not only for crime itself, but because of his advanced age. At 74, he was the oldest inmate executed in Alabama's history, and one of the oldest in the United States since executions resumed in the late 1970s. The case reignited debates about the morality of executing elderly prisoners and the purpose of such long-delayed punishments. For Lillian Montgomery's surviving relatives, justice had finally been served, albeit after decades of waiting. But for others, particularly human rights activists and legal scholars, Hubbard's case raised uncomfortable questions. Should someone who committed a horrific act decades earlier still be put to death after so much time? Does the passage of time change the meaning of justice? The case also led to renewed scrutiny of Alabama's parole system, particularly how someone with a prior murder conviction could be released back into society, only to kill again. We move on to the story of Thomas Douglas Arthur. Thomas Douglas Arthur's case, culminating in his execution on May 25, 2017, for the 1982 murder of Troy Wicker, is one of the most protracted and controversial in Alabama's capital punishment history. Arthur's execution, following decades of legal battles, multiple retrials, and claims of innocence, underscores the complexities and debates surrounding the death penalty in the United States. Born on March 22, 1942, Thomas Arthur had a criminal history prior to the Wicker case. In 1977, he was convicted for the murder of his sister-in-law, Eloise Bray West, in Bear Creek, Alabama. According to court records, Arthur, after consuming alcohol, entered West's workplace, confronted her about his wife's whereabouts, and shot her in the head during an argument. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, but was later placed in a prison work release program. On February 1, 1982, Troy Wicker was found shot in the right eye while sleeping in his bed. His wife, Judy Wicker, initially told police that a black man had broken into their home, raped her, and killed her husband. However, inconsistencies in her story led investigators to question her account. Subsequently, Judy admitted to conspiring with Thomas Arthur to murder her husband, promising him $10,000 for the act. She testified that Arthur entered the home disguised with an afro wig and dark makeup to make the crime appear as if committed by a black intruder. Arthur was first convicted in 1983 and sentenced to death. However, this conviction was overturned due to the improper admission of evidence regarding his prior murder conviction. A second trial in 1987 also resulted in a conviction and death sentence, but it too was overturned on appeal. In 1991, during his third trial, Arthur was again convicted and sentenced to death. Notably, he requested the death penalty, believing it would provide more avenues for appeal. Over the years, Arthur's legal team filed numerous appeals, challenging the validity of the evidence and the fairness of the trial proceedings. They argued that there was no physical evidence linking Arthur to the crime scene, and that Judy Wicker's testimony was unreliable, given her initial false statements and potential motives. In 2008, an inmate named Bobby Ray Gilbert confessed under oath to murdering Troy Wicker, claiming he had an affair with Judy Wicker and that she had hired him to kill her husband. Gilbert stated that he wore an afro wig and dark makeup during the crime, mirroring Judy's initial description of the assailant. However, during a subsequent hearing, Gilbert invoked his Fifth Amendment right and refused to testify, leading the court to dismiss his confession as not credible. Arthur's defense team also sought advanced DNA testing on the wig allegedly worn by the killer, arguing that new testing methods could potentially exonerate him. However, the courts denied these requests, stating that previous tests have been inconclusive and that no new evidence warranted further analysis. After 7 prior execution dates were postponed due to legal challenges, Arthur was executed by lethal injection at Holman Correctional Facility. He was pronounced dead at 12:15 a.m. In his final moments, Arthur expressed remorse to his children, apologizing for his failures as a father. Arthur's execution reignited debates over the death penalty, especially concerning the potential for wrongful convictions and the ethical implications of executing individuals with lingering doubts about their guilt. His case remains a focal point in discussions about the reliability of eyewitness testimony, the importance of physical evidence, and the challenges inherent in the capital punishment system. This is just part 1 of the list. Watch out for part 2 tomorrow. To be updated, kindly subscribe to our channel now.